How are you guys doing? Today is Saturday, March 5th, 2022. I'm James Sims, and for this episode of The Elite, I'm going to do an elite individual profile on Justin Fields. The elite starting quarterback for the Chicago Bears turns 23 today, and my intention with this episode is, of course, to zoom in and look at how he's been able to impact every single game in and game out, and look at how he's been an elite impactful player on a micro level. And of course, I'm going to zoom out and look at how he's been able to impact the teams and the organizations he's been on from a macro level. Considering he's just 23 and he's just got it started in the NFL, I do think that Justin Fields is quite the player. He has quite the narrative, and he has quite a lot of amazing football ahead of him. I'm standing in at about 6'3", 227 pounds. As a quarterback, as a 23-year-old quarterback, he kind of has everything that you really want him to. He has a head on his shoulders. He knows what he's doing when he goes into every game. He can run incredibly well. He can make almost every single throw. I think over the next few years, I think with him, he's mainly just going to be working on catching himself up to the NFL speed of the best football players to play on this planet, because of course is a tick faster than college football, which he completely dominated. And now that he's had the chance to even compete and possibly earn the full starting spot for the Chicago Bears, I can't wait to see what he does. But of course, to digress, Justin Fields, originally from Kennesaw, Georgia, would end up being the top recruit in his class, being the top rated dual threat quarterback out of high school. Originally, after committing to Penn State, he would end up committing to play his very first year at the University of Georgia. His very first season at the University of Georgia, or his only season at Georgia, would be his freshman year in 2018. Which would go down as his age 19 season. And this, of course, was a season in which the Georgia Bulldogs would finish as a top 10 team, making it all the way to the Sugar Bowl with a 11-3 record, where they would end up losing to Texas. But in this season, Justin Fields would end up playing 12 games, as he was playing behind Jake Fromm, but he would end up playing a lot of garbage time minutes. In that season, Justin Fields would end up completing about 69% of the passes he threw for about 328 yards and 4 touchdowns. He would also run for an additional 226 yards and 4 touchdowns himself. He would go on a combine for almost 600 total yards and 8 touchdowns for a Bulldogs team that was a top 10 team. Following that first season, after situations with the baseball team, he would end up transferring to Ohio State. And after a situation in which he would have to have sat out, he actually didn't have to sit out, and he would end up having to play his very next sophomore season for Ohio State. And his sophomore season would go on to be his age 22 season. And in that season, he would go on to play 14 games for an Ohio State team that would go on to finish with a 13-1 record, as they would go on to go all the way to the semifinal game, and they would end up losing to Clemson that year. But regardless, Justin Fields, in the 14 games that he played, he will go on to see himself complete 67% of his passes, as he threw for 3,273 total yards. He threw for 41 touchdowns and he threw 3 interceptions, as 2 of those interceptions came in that semifinal game. On the ground, he would also run for 484 yards and 10 touchdowns. He would go on to finish with almost 380 total yards of offense alongside his 50 touchdowns. In 2019, he would go on to be named he was named to the first team All-Big Ten. He was named a second team All-American. 2019 was the lone season that he was named an All-American in college. He was the Big Ten championship game MVP. He would be named the Greasy Breeze Quarterback of the Year, which is given to the best quarterback in the Big Ten. And he was also given the Offensive Player of the Year in the Big Ten for the very first time that year as well. Like I said, Ohio State would end up being the number 3 team in the nation, and Justin Fields was a big reason why. So this would transition into his third season, of course, his junior season, after he was a leading candidate for the Heisman Trophy the year before. He would go on to play 8 games in 2020 during the COVID-shortened season for an Ohio State team that would end up going 7-1. They would end up going all the way to the championship game again, where they would end up losing in the championship game itself to Alabama. In this shortened college season itself, where Justin Fields would push himself out as being yet another Heisman candidate, he would go on to complete 70% of his passes, which would be the best in his 3 years. He would throw for 2,100 yards, 22 touchdowns, and 6 picks. He would also run for 383 yards and 5 touchdowns, so he would go on to finish with nearly 2,500 total yards of offense, and he would go on to finish with 27 total touchdowns on the year in 8 total games, averaging nearly 3.5 touchdowns per game. For an Ohio State team that would go on to beat Clemson in the Sugar Bowl, beating the team that beat them the year before. But that, like I said, that was the year they came up short. Following his 3rd year of eligibility and his 2nd year at Ohio State, he would make the first team All Big Ten for the 2nd year in a row. He would go on to be named the Big Ten Quarterback of the Year and, of course, the Big Ten Offensive Player of the Year, which, of course, big thing to win twice, considering he would only play at Ohio State for 2 years. After his 3 years of college football that saw him play for Georgia and Ohio State, he would be one of the top prospects in the 2021 NFL draft, which was last year's draft. He would end up, or I guess looking at how he would end up, he would be the 10th quarterback, or he'd be the 4th quarterback taken, as Trevor Lawrence went number 1 out of Clemson to Jacksonville. Zach Wilson went 2nd out of BYU to New York, the Jets, And then Trey Lance was the 3rd overall pick out of North Dakota State to the San Francisco 49ers. Justin Fields was also taken a pick right after Devontae Smith. Other notable players in that draft, or at least in that first round, include Kyle Pitts, the elite tight end for the Atlanta Falcons, who was drafted out of Florida. Jamar Chase was taken with the 5th overall pick by the Cincinnati Bengals out of LSU. The pick immediately after Justin Fields was Micah Parsons by the Dallas Cowboys out of Penn State. The 15th pick in that draft was Mac Jones out of Alabama, as he was selected by the Patriots. Najee Harris was taken by the Steelers. So, of course, you see Pro Bowlers within his draft class, and that's just last year's rookies to get a sense of his competition. And so far, he's only played 1 season with the Chicago Bears, as he would go on to start this most recent season, starting behind Andy Dalton, as he would have to earn his starting spot. He would go on to start 10 of the 12 games he would play for a Chicago Bears team that finished with a 6-11 record this year in Matt Nagy's 4th season. They would go on to win 2 less games than the prior season. In this season, Justin Fields, as a starter, would go on to finish with a 2-8 record, as he would complete 58.9% of his passes this year. He would go on to throw for 1,870 yards with 7 touchdowns alongside 10 interceptions. He would also go on to rush for 420 yards and 2 touchdowns on the ground. So he would finish with at least 220 total yards of offense, 9 total touchdowns. He would have more interceptions than total touchdowns this year. And many would argue that just even based off of this rookie season itself, it would be enough for him to take it down. I do think that he is getting settled into a situation that once he figures it out, I think that he will most definitely have it down. I can't wait to see what he does within this next calendar year between now and his 24th birthday on March 5th, 2023. But until then, I can't wait to see what he does. And hopefully, if you ever get a chance to watch him, you can. He wears number 1 for the Chicago Bears. I think that he is a candidate that's that's primed for a breakout season next year. I would watch out for the Chicago Bears, especially when Justin Fields is on the field. With that said, I want to thank everyone for listening to all 9-10 minutes of this piece. I do hope all is well. Once all of today's exhibitions and matchups are done, I'm going to come back tomorrow on Sunday, March 6th, for another episode of The Elite. So until then, thanks for listening. I hope all is well, and I'll catch you tomorrow. Peace out.